только по телефону проверить, слышно мне вас или нет.
Они будут писать в чате.
В чате? Ну, здорово.
Я прошу
Тогда
всех писать в
напишите,
чате.
говорите, скажите что-нибудь там в чате.
Так, уважаемые коллеги, если вы меня видите и слышите, да, напишите в чате.
Они только суп
Ничего, мы еще раз повторим. Мы сейчас увидим, на самом деле, вот еще тоже будет циферка, наверное, расти.
Ну
так.
вот, все, что я понимаю, дальше просто в конце микрофон у вас хорошо работает.
Ну,
я
да.
вижу, камеру вы все видите. Да. Я могу, просто сети второй нет.
Ну да.
Я могу попробовать какой-то ноутбук сейчас проверить.
Ну вот, пошли, вон появились. Подписки, вон пошли. Так, пожалуйста, в чате отпишитесь, слышите ли вы меня, или если вы меня не слышите, соответственно, тоже об этом отпишитесь. Потому что я вижу, количество народу растет, хочу удостовериться, что вам слышен звук. Если возникают проблемы со звуком, пожалуйста, отписывайтесь. Ага, слышно. Так, я вижу, что кто-то ответил слышно. Угу. Так, все слышит.
Сколько раз
Да не хотя бы один раз просто эфир.
Когда вот здесь нарастет.
Ну да.
В эфире там просто какое-то время здесь будет. Просто очень сохранить.
Да, хорошо. Да, все, звук слышен.
Спасибо за терпение.
Вам спасибо. Okay, so we're still waiting for more people to connect, obviously, and right. So we're still waiting for more people to connect, and well, I see the number is growing. More and more people are coming in, which is good, right? I will give maybe a couple more minutes to people to connect, and after that we'll have the lecture. We have the chat, as you can see it, and if you have any problems, please send an SOS message in the chat, right? So if I need to repeat something, or you lost the signal or something, okay? I see 17 people are 19, right? Okay, that's good. Okay, so when we see, I think we can access the lecture after the lecture as well. Some of it is being saved, but I'm new to this system myself. It's my third lecture so far online through this YouTube live transmission, and I don't know, to be honest, how it works. But in case there are any other issues, we'll try to address them. You can always come back to me with questions if things are not clear. Okay, and now or later you can drop me a line through the emails, just from your personal accounts. Concerning the papers which you sent me, I'm looking at them at the moment. There are quite a few of them, and I have a bit of a difficulty downloading everything and saving it, but I presume it must be my computer or my internet or something, not obviously your point. I will come back with marks and comments and corrections and suggestions. I'm also thinking what to do about the cards with stylistic devices. So what I would suggest at the moment is you obviously keep accumulating them, get them ready. My hope is that this coronavirus will not last forever, right? There will be at some point, when we can either get together or you can bring the stuff in. I will try to get the feedback to you as well. But there is a bit of a problem because I also have paperwork at the university, and I also have to inform the colleagues about things going on and so on and so forth. So consequently, I don't always have all the time in the world. I mean, even though theoretically I'm not supposed to be having classes, I do have classes. Some of them are live, like you have this lecture now, or some of them are organized in different formats. And of course, we do have to check quite a lot of papers, unfortunately, these days, which is rather unfortunate. Okay, I have 26 people, maybe a couple more minutes, and then I will start. As I said, once again, if you have any questions, if you can't hear me, right, if the sound is not okay, there is a chat, you can let me know. If the worst comes to the worst, I'll get some technician over. We have a person who is kindly sort of spending night with us at the university, and we can rely on some help, some technical help at the university, right? Okay, 26 people are connected to this mail at the moment, right, to this live feed, and I think we should start. Okay, so yes, hello everybody. Once again, 27. We keep losing somebody. I have the number jumping up and down. It's almost like people leave us, right? Don't go away, please. I want to see obviously more people out there. Oh, 28 now. Good. Right. Do stay. Please do stay. Even if you don't sort of belong here. Okay, there's a question about next week. We obviously all listen to the president's speech today. At the moment, what I can say is we need to get information from the rector. As soon as we have that, we'll send information out. But I would like to start the lecture now because we don't have that much time, and obviously I need to be done by 10:20. And I will try to speak slowly. I will try to repeat the points which I would like you to write down, but again, as I said, there is a chat for the newcomers. Make sure you drop me a line if there is a problem. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the system of functional styles in the English language. And we have several points to discuss. We need to talk about the approaches to the functional styles. We need to talk about the factors conditioning those functional styles. We will briefly talk about style features, and we will also talk about the taxonomy of functional styles. So we have quite a number of points, and we are going to, one more thing, sort of, we are talking about we're beginning to deal with the second half of our contents of our course of stylistics. We spoke about rather the resources, stylistic resources, that is stylistic devices of all sorts, and now we're moving to the second half, which is the functional styles. Okay, and we're going to start with the history into the research into functional styles. Okay, now the research into functional styles began. We can say began sort of in 1925 when Professor Vinokur differentiated functionally motivated language systems. So Professor Vinokur differentiated functionally motivated language systems. These systems were described or were called, sorry, I'll have the text closer to me here so I can sort of look more at the camera and less sort of down. So these language systems were called colloquial, poetic, scientific, newspaper, and bell letter. So we have 5 language systems once again: colloquial, poetic, scientific, newspaper, and bell letter. Of these words, the bell letter system is probably the most difficult to spell. The French spelling is used. B-E-L-L-E-S, that was the first word. And the second word is letter, L-E-T-T-R-E-S. So that's once again the first word, B-E-L-L-E-S. And the second word is L-E-T-T-R-E-S. Well, as you know, the French, they like to write a lot of letters, but then they don't pronounce half of them. We also know the Russian word belletristika. This is where it comes from. It actually comes from this particular term. However, yes, very good. And Fyodor, thank you very much. If everybody else can see the chat, that's the correct spelling. Very good, right? But moving on. So once again, to emphasize, Professor Vinokur spoke about these language systems, right? Functionally motivated language systems, but the formal research into functional style is associated with the so-called Prague Linguistic Circle or Prague Linguistic Group. So they are considered to be the school of linguistics which initiated the research into functional styles and actually came up with the term itself. So they were the ones who created the term functional styles. You also need to remember that the Prague Linguistic Group was joined by some researchers from Russia. First of all, Roman Jakobson, who eventually became an American researcher called Roman Jacobson, right? So he left his mark on a number of continents, I would say, right, on a number of linguistic schools. But initially, he obviously was a Russian researcher. So he spans half of Europe and, well, half the world when he moved to the United States, owing to the onslaught of the Second World War. Anyway, so we have a certain continuity of the Russian research tradition and the European research tradition. And the term functional style itself was created by one of the representatives of the Prague Linguistic Group, whose name was Havranek. Havranek, Havranek. Havranek. In the Russian spelling, it is Gavranek. So he was the one to use the term functional style for the first time. And later he himself called it functional dialect. But that was his own change, and that was not shared by other researchers. In 1932, in one of his papers, he made the following point, and I'm going to quote this point which he made, and I'm going to dictate it to you so you can have a good idea of how they understood functional styles. So what he said was the following. It's a quotation, so don't forget the quotation marks. The language means which function as instruments for stylistic purposes. So the language means which function as instruments for stylistic purposes constitute only a specific manner of organization, constitute only a specific manner of organization of concrete utterances. Constitute only a specific manner of organization of concrete utterances. End of quote. So once again, the whole quotation. The language means which function as instruments for stylistic purposes constitute only a specific manner of organization of concrete utterances. End of quote. So that was Havranek, and the paper was published in 1932. What we see from this quotation is that he pointed out that same words could be rearranged to form different styles. So same words could be rearranged to form different styles. And it also means that within different functional styles, we do not have a closed system of linguistic means. We can borrow different linguistic means from different spheres within the human language. We can modify the systems, we can add things to them, we can take things out of them, but overall, functional styles are based on our regular human language. Nothing specifically or nothing special, nothing particularly special, nothing particularly restricted to just the functional styles. Okay, if we continue with the Prague Linguistic Circle, we can also mention one more researcher, and I think we mentioned him at the beginning of our lectures. That was Professor Mathesius in the Russian spelling. We spelled him with TH. And he also obviously continued the research, and this particular paper was created in 1942, although the date is quite curious, right? He was stressing the difference between the individual, inimitable style of a creative artist. So he was stressing the difference between the individual, inimitable style of a creative artist. Inimitable means something that cannot be imitated. There are a lot of letters I in it. Inimitable, except for able at the end, right? Everything else is just letters I. The individual, inimitable style of a creative artist, and the inter-individual, it's a single word, inter-individual, and more highly conventionalized styles. The inter-individual and more highly conventionalized styles. So once again, the whole point. So Mathesius stressed the difference between the individual, inimitable style of a creative artist and the inter-individual and more highly conventionalized styles. In other words, he pointed out the contrast between the bell letter style, which you know how to spell, right, and the other styles. So he pointed out this contrast, or maybe even the opposition, between the bell letter style and the other styles. And actually, the role or the position of the bell letter style and the existence of the other functional styles was discussed for quite some time within the research into functional styles. And there are certain differences of opinion on the subject. For example, within the Russian tradition, there are researchers, rather, I would say some, I would say there are researchers who believe that the bell letter style should not be treated as a functional style because practically all means of the language can be found in bell letter style texts or in literary text. And therefore, it is difficult to actually restrict the style to any kind of more or less general underlying principles, which of course has certain truths behind it, because, for example, we know that literary works can be written in slang, or they can be written in highly formal language if necessary. And how can we say that? How can we talk about a functional style which theoretically can include any kind of language means and can do anything that the writers see fit doing in their texts, as long as they communicate their idea to the readers? Okay, in the Western tradition, on the contrary, for quite some time, only the bell letter style was treated as a functional style and actually as something that stylistics should be looking into, or should be looking at, if you want. And the other varieties of language were not supposed to be part of the research into functional style, or should not be other function, or should not be treated as such. Okay. Also, just for your convenience, please remember that the term functional style quite often is abbreviated as FS, capital F, capital S. Quite handy, right? Instead of writing the whole word. Quite easily recognizable. Same thing goes with bill letter style. I guess you can also abbreviate it as BLS because that word combination can be used a lot. And of course, we'll talk about other options as well. Okay, right. Anyway, so that was the history. And from the 1930s, the research into varieties of language has been going on. Has continued, and we can see quite a lot of publications on this topic. Right. What I need to say now is that this Prague linguistic group belongs to one of the two major approaches to the research into functional style. We have the so-called functional approach, and we also have the so-called variation approach. And we start with the functional approach. And we need to say that in its turn, functional approach can be represented by two sub-paradigms or sub-approaches or models, we can call them. One is monofunctional, and the second one is polyfunctional. Monofunctional and polyfunctional, let's call them models, right? So within the functional approach, we can talk about the monofunctional model and polyfunctional model. And we start with the monofunctional model. Okay, monofunctional model. Now, why it is called so? Monofunctional model looks at the correlation between the function and the functional style. So monofunctional model looks at the correlation between the function and the functional style. And the monofunctional model believes that one function can be characteristic of one style. Sorry about that. So one function can be characteristic of one style, or in another variety of this model, one function is characteristic of several styles. So one function is characteristic of one style, or one function is characteristic of several styles. The representative of the monofunctional model was, for example, Professor Galperin. Professor Galperin, as I said before, the founder of our Department of English Stilistics. So we do have to mention him. He is our founding father, so to say. We have to be respectful towards our own heritage. Okay, so for him, every functional style had one specific function and could be identified by this specific function. And Professor Galperin defined functional style in the following way. He said that a functional style is a system of interrelated language means. A system of interrelated language means which serves a definite aim in communication. So for him, functional style is a system of interrelated language means which serves a definite aim in communication. Serves because it's a system. Okay, so hence we have the agreement, right? So it's a system which serves a definite aim in communication. Another researcher who belonged to this monofunctional model within the functional approach was academician Vinogradov. he singled out 3 functions, but these 3 functions brought about 5 functional styles, which means that several functional styles shared this function which they were supposed to serve, or to service, you can say in other words. So the functions were as follows. He singled out the communicative function, then the informative function. So the communicative function, the informative function, and the pragmatic function. The pragmatic function. The communicative function, in the opinion of academician Vinogradov, brought about the style of conversation. So the communicative function brought about the style of conversation. The informative function brought about 2 functional styles. The first one was the style of scientific prose. The style of scientific prose. And the second functional style here was the style of official documents. Official documents. So the scientific prose and official documents. But of course, you can see that the 2 functional styles would inform the target audience of different things, right? Scientific prose would describe the world around us, right? Would summarize the results of academic research. And the style of official documents would inform the target audience about certain rules and regulations, or probably relations between certain entities. I'm not trying to advertise this coffee, but you just needed a sip of drink, a sip of liquid. Okay, although, of course, it's nice coffee. I do like it. Right, anyway, the third function, the pragmatic function, also brought about 2 functional styles. These were the journalese. The spelling is Journal, like the word journal, right? And then is, which is a suffix, similar to Congolese, Chinese, Japanese, and so on and so forth. So the journalese. So in this case, we talked about the newspapers and the magazine publishing example. And the second functional style here was the bell letter style, which you already know the spelling. The bell letter style, or you can just abbreviate it as BLC. Okay, so the last 2 functional styles are united by the pragmatic function, in the meaning that both varieties of the language are supposed to influence the reader, influence the target audience in different ways, obviously, but still there is certain influence. Excuse me, I just need to grab a bottle of water. It's my second class. I mean, I had another class before, but it's just... Hello, more people are joining us. We have 32 people now. Right. Okay, so that was what I had to say about the monofunctional model. Now we move to the polyfunctional model, and here we also have a number of prominent representatives. The polyfunctional model talks about different functions being, the polyfunctional model talks about the same function being inherent in different styles. So the same functions being inherent in different styles. But there will be a difference in the degree of their presence and in the combination of these functions, in the meaning that some of them will be more significant than others or more frequently used than others. Again, we'll talk about functions when we speak about specific functional styles later in our term. Depending on obviously how it depends. If the worst comes to the worst, I guess we'll be able to do it still online through this this format that we have here. At least it's an opportunity, right? It's an option, and you can listen to it rather than sort of me sending you a text or sending you just a bunch of notes. Right, so in terms of representatives of the polyfunctional model, we can single out Professor Yuri Stepanov and Professor Schweitzer. And again, I'm going to give a number of definitions, which I would like you to write down. We start with the point made by Yuri Stepanov. It's a reasonably lengthy passage, but I can't do much about it because each word in it is significant. Okay, so what he spoke about when he spoke about functional styles, he said the following. He described the functional style in the following way. He said, a historically developed and socially cognized, C-O-G-N-I-Z-E-D, so socially cognized, S-O-G-N-I-Z-E-D, cognized subsystem. So once again, from the very start, a historically developed and socially cognized subsystem within the system of a national language, subsystem within the system of a national language, assigned to certain communicative situations. Assigned is A-S-S-I-G-N-E-D, assigned to certain communicative situations, or in brackets, speech situations. So instead of communicative situations, you can also use speech situations. Brackets close. And characterized by a set of means of expression, and characterized by a set of means of expression and the underlying principles of their selection from the national language. Okay, once again, the whole definition. So, a historically developed and socially cognized subsystem within the system of a national language, assigned to certain communicative situations or speech situations in brackets, and characterized by a set of means of expression and the underlying principles of their selection from the national language. Okay, right. So I just go through it one more time, just in case somebody missed something. Once again, the whole definition: a historically developed and socially cognized subsystem within the system of a national language assigned to certain communicative situations, speech situations, and characterized by a set of means of expression and the underlying principles of their selection from the national language. So selection from the national language. Okay? Sorry. This is not product placement before anybody starts sort of asking any questions. It's just an accidental purchase of the bottle of water. Okay, so we said that was the definition provided by Yuri Stepanov. Okay, and the second person I mentioned was Professor Schweitzer. When he spoke about functional styles, he spoke about rather classes of speech situations. So he understood functional styles as a class of speech situations or a communicative domain. He spoke about functional styles as a communicative domain. Sorry. Okay, so that would complete the part which deals with the functional approach. So we spoke about the monofunctional model and the polyfunctional model, and now the second approach to research into functional styles is called variation approach. Here we also have a number of researchers whom we've mentioned before or whom we'll mention later. And the first name I'll start with will be Niels Erik Enquist. If you remember, again, we mentioned him at the beginning of our lectures when we spoke about style. He was the one who came up with a lot of different definitions of styles, which he accumulated from other people's research. So he was quoting, right, summarizing literature. Anyway, he spoke about functional styles in different papers. So what I have is not a list of, not definitions, but basically different ways of describing functional styles, which can be found in his papers. So he spoke about functional styles as a sort of a linguistic variation. So he spoke about functional styles as a sort of a linguistic variation. In another paper, he spoke about a functional style as a contextually conditioned variation. Contextually conditioned variation. And the context was not linguistic, but extra-linguistic for him. So contextually conditioned variation. This person is Enquist. E-N-K-V-I-S-T. E-N-K-V-I-S-T. His first names were Niels Erik. He is Swedish. So Niels Erik Enquist. The convenience is that you spell them the way you hear them. Okay, Niels is N-I-L-S. Niels Erik Enquist. Enquist is E-N-K-V-I-S-T. Okay, as I said, weird spelling, but he is Swedish. Okay, so he spoke about functional styles as a sort of a linguistic variation, right, as contextually conditioned variation, and also he described the functional style even as a fuzzy set of texts. Fuzzy. Fuzzy is F-U-Z-Z-Y. I do like this word, and I'm going to maybe make a couple of notes about what he means here, this fuzzy set. When we talk about fuzzy sets of texts, we mean that these sets of texts do not have restricted borders. And there are two reasons behind it. The first is, of course, that the language continues to function and people create new texts following the conventions of certain functional styles, or they create texts which serve similar aims in communication, right? And therefore that goes on. I think everything is working. What do you want? Sorry, I'm having memorized. I'm getting memorized for the posterity, obviously. Sorry, just I'm not very well advanced about it. Right. Anyway, so we have we're talking about fuzzy sets of text. So one reason is that more and more texts are being created. So we have the unlimited set, right, and set which is not finished. But what we also talk about when we talk about fuzzy sets of text is that we can always talk about texts which are better examples of a functional style, or texts which are not such good examples of functional styles. To give a sort of an idea, sometimes we end up with borderline texts. We end up with texts which exist sort of on the border between one functional style and another functional style. For instance, to give you an illustration, we have popular scientific texts, which technically are supposed to be part of the functional style of scientific prose, because they're supposed to explain the nature of the world to the audience. But because such texts are intended for the general public, and that means people who do not have special knowledge in a certain field, it means that the authors of such texts have to, well, they can use different words. They have to give up. They have to get rid of. They have to shed some of the characteristic features of certain functional styles, because the audiences do not expect to know certain. They rather, I would say, no, they do not. They actually expect to be given more explanation. They expect to be given more illustration. But on the other hand, such audiences are not expected to go to the library and clarify some unknown points, just in case they don't understand something in the text. If they don't understand popular scientific text, they will just not read them, right? They will stop and go somewhere. So the texts are supposed to be interesting for the readers. And quite often, it's very difficult to differentiate between popular scientific texts and essays, because the genre of essays also has quite a large variety of kinds of essays. And some of them are written to inform. And in this case, text written to inform, essays written to inform, share certain characteristics with popular scientific text, because you can write an essay to inform on a scientific topic if you want to. Since it's very hard to say it specifically that this is still a scientific text, or it is already an essay on a scientific topic, we may have a bit of a problem determining the border between the two kinds. And hence, it gave Enquist an opportunity or a possibility to say that we have fuzzy sets of text. But of course, I would say within every functional style, we have good examples of functional styles. The texts which form the core of the functional style, core as in core, the central part, or the core of an apple, like the thing in the center, which is essential or typical or a very good illustration of a certain functional style. And then we have the periphery, which where we have the texts which are not 100% typical of a certain functional style, or they share a lot of characteristics with other varieties. Okay, so this is why he spoke about the fuzzy sets of text. Another representative within the variation approach was Professor Nair. Russian spelling is N-I-E-R. He was a student of Professor Galperin. He also worked in our Department of English Stylistics. The English spelling will be N-A-E-R, Nair. He also gave a definition to the functional style, and he described it, or he defined the functional style in the following way. He said, it is a socially recognized and functionally conditioned model. So it is a socially recognized and functionally conditioned model of systematic linguistic variation. So once again, it is a socially recognized and functionally conditioned model of systematic linguistic variation. Okay, once again, the whole definition. It is a socially recognized and functionally conditioned model of systematic linguistic variation. Okay, right. So, and that basically completes our presentation of the approaches to the research into functional style. And we move to our next point of today's lecture, which is the conditioning factors, which is also an important point. So what factors condition the appearance of a functional style? We can single out 4 of those factors. So the first factor is function. And by function, we understand the aim of communication. So we understand the aim of communication. The second conditioning factor is the communicative domain or the sphere of communication. The communicative domain or the sphere of communication. For example, by such spheres we can understand academic research or the law or mass media, for example, and other spheres where certain functional styles may appear. The third function, which conditions functional styles, is socio-cultural development. Socio-cultural development. Socio-cultural development can include such kinds of development as historical, political, economic, technological, and so on. So these kinds of socio-cultural development can include historical, political, economic, technological developments, and so on. So different, I would say, different stages in the human development, in the social development, which we can talk about. Now, why is it important? Well, it is important to remember that until you have a certain requirement to communicate certain kind of information, you will not have the functional style. For example, I guess one of the sort of best, probably easiest to demonstrate examples will be that we are all used to mass media. We are all used to newspapers. But if you think about this, historically, we only received the new style about 200 years ago. At the time when newspapers needed to be published regularly. Because until then, first of all, society did not need to disseminate information. Important information was sent by special couriers across the country. For example, the king or the queen would send special couriers with a very important piece of information which had to be announced to the public, and of course it would be announced orally. Or the monarch could write to representatives of aristocracy, for example, of course, if they were literate. They could read those missives. But most of the communication was oral and infrequent, first of all. Only the most important points were were sent out as information. And the general public would probably receive most of the information with the help of gossip. People traveled from their villages to the marketplace in town and brought back the latest information that was available to them, and that information could be, I don't know, up to 6 months old if the sort of the meetings, the sort of the purchase and the sale of produce was infrequent. For example, maybe the peasants traveled to the nearby town once a quarter, twice a year, for example, to sell their produce, and then would never go back until next year. So information was there, but it wasn't probably very fresh. But there was no need for the information, and only when it becomes vitally important to be aware of what's going on in the world, including the economic development and the commercial development, then of course the newspapers will have to appear, and now they are replaced with the internet. They were replaced with the telegraph. Then they were replaced with the internet. Well, television obviously came in there as well. So all those will affect the language, will create the need to create specific means of communication. Another good example of the need for a certain stage of development was scientific discourse or scientific style. Again, obviously, science is a reasonably young sphere of human communication, and different genres were created within scientific community. But I guess the first method of disseminating information, scientific information, was by writing letters. So scientists carried out research and wrote correspondence, created correspondence to either their fellow scientists or to some kind of society of scientists, and that was sufficient. And now, of course, if you look at the academic publications, we have articles, we have textbooks, we have dissertations, we have graduation papers, by the way, remember, and so on and so forth. But it has developed with the development of science. Okay, and so this was the first three factors, and then we have one more factor which conditions the functional styles, and that is individual and communal choice. So individual and communal choice. Okay. Which can, of course, seem probably a little bit unexpected or a little bit strange, that individual choice can actually affect the creation of functional styles. But it does, because in the long run, it is people who use the language. The language offers different means. But if you remember when we spoke about phenomena, the need, or rather the pattern which would make choices stylistic, we spoke about the regularity of choice. And of course, it means that communities and individuals choose means which they find preferable for the communication of certain ideas. So the language has more means, offers more means to the communicants, but the communicants make selections, and they may have certain preferences, or they may see other people use various means and like them and copy such means, and obviously other means are not selected, and therefore they do not become part of a functional style. Okay, so this is how the pattern or the system works. Right, now our next point. Our next point is to talk about style features. Okay, so also important, and this is some kind of foundation on which we can base the description of functional styles. So we can say that each functional style is characterized by a number of features. And these features can be extra-linguistic and linguistic. So the style features can be extra-linguistic and linguistic. the notion of style features was first suggested in 1959 by a researcher whose name was Schneider. The name was German, so Schneider. Schneider, 1959. So he was the first to suggest the notion of style features. And by these style features, he first of all understood the extra-linguistic characteristics of different functional styles. So he spoke about the extra-linguistic characteristics. His theory, his idea, was further developed by Professor Kozhina, a Russian researcher, already, and she divided the style features into primary and secondary. So she subdivided those style features into primary and secondary style features, judging by their significance in the characterization of a functional style. So by primary style features, she understood predominant specific features. So by primary style features, she understood predominant specific features conditioned by the extra-linguistic properties of the style. So by primary style features, she understood predominant specific features conditioned by extra-linguistic properties of the style. To give you an example, if we look at the style of official documents, the primary style features will be its prescriptive, P-R-E-S-C-R-I, prescriptive, mandatory, and impersonal character. So prescriptive, mandatory, M-A-N-D-A-T-O-R-Y, mandatory. So prescriptive, mandatory, and impersonal character. As well as precision. So prescriptive, mandatory, and impersonal character, as well as precision. So these will be the primary style features for the style of official documents. And the secondary style feature could be, for example, conventionality. Which means that, on the one hand, not all varieties within the official documents will necessarily be conventional or conventionalized, but and besides, I would say some conventionality could be a style feature in other functional styles as well. It's not restricted to just the style of official documents, but prescriptive and mandatory character will be typical of this particular style. Right, and then these extra-linguistic features can find their linguistic expression within the functional style. And the language properties which are attributed to a functional style, so the language properties which are attributed to the functional style will be called style markers. So the language properties attributed to the functional style will be called style markers. For example, we can talk about, if we look at this style of official documents again, we can point out the use of passive voice. We can talk about the use of parallelism. And, for example, we can talk about the use of particularly long and complex syntactical constructions. If you look at some varieties of official documents, you can find in them cases when the whole page of text is just one sentence, okay? One single, very complex sentence with parallels, with clauses arranged in a parallel way. And there are certain underlying principles for that. And I guess if you deal with legal documents, you would know that. You will be quite familiar with the complexity of the construction. Okay. So the last point, I guess we have time for today, will be the classification of functional styles, or, as you know, I like clever words. Instead of classification, we can talk about the taxonomy of functional styles. Taxonomy, T-A-X-O-N-O-M-Y, taxonomy. Taxonomy means classification. There exist a number of classifications, and the reason behind this variety of classification is that classifications can be based on different principles. So different researchers have a different understanding of where we can single out functional styles, or what we can include into the list of functional styles. So we start with the classification of Professor Galperin. And he singled out 5 functional styles. All of them were singled out in the written standard English. So that's his basis for classification. He singled out functional styles in standard written English only. So his functional styles were as follows. The Bell letter style, and you can see it in the chat. The spelling is still visible. The French way, the Bell letter style. Publicist style. Newspaper style. The style of scientific prose, and the style of official documents. The style of official documents. So once again, we have the Bell letter style, the publicist style, the newspaper style, the style of scientific prose, and the style of official documents. So altogether 5 styles, all differentiated within standard written English. The second classification comes from Professor Nair, who was, as we said, Professor Galperin's student. So he followed Professor Galperin's classification. So he selected the same 5 functional styles, but he added one more. So he added one more functional style. He added the so-called technical style. By technical style, he understood the style for the texts which deal with all sorts of technical issues. For example, manuals, operating instructions, descriptions of equipment, and so on and so forth. Because as you can see, of course, they do form a group of their own. They can be connected to scientific research, but they are different. They have a different function. They need to tell the people how to use certain kinds of equipment, not what they consist of, right? Not what the world consists of. I mean, not how they reflect the general I don't know, structure of the text of this, how this equipment would reflect general structure of the world. It was the classification by Professor Nayer. Okay, remember the one who we mentioned on the variation approach today. Okay, so he added this technical style to it, to the classification. So he spoke about 6 functional styles. The third existing classification was offered by Professor Irina Arnold, Russian one as well, despite the name. So she also spoke about the same 5 functional styles of Professor Galperin, right? So his classification is quite convenient for that purpose, right? But besides that, she also added the so-called style of conversation. So she added style of conversation, which means she went beyond standard written English. Okay. She also spoke about the functional style within the spoken variety of English, which is different. Okay, which is a kind of a point where Professor Galperin could disagree with Professor Arnold, right? And they had this different understanding of the classification. Okay. So that was still not classification. Of course, we also have the Western tradition. We said that initially they only focused on the bell-letter style or the literary style, and later they recognized that there are other varieties of language, other spheres of communication, which need to be serviced by their own varieties of language. And different researchers also spoke about different kinds of functional styles. I will not give you a full classification, but I will mention several functional styles, for example, which were singled out by David Crystal and his colleague David Davy. I think we're talking about the 1960s, end of the 1960s then. One of the functional styles which they pointed out was the style of religion. The style of religion. Which, of course, as you could imagine, could not be singled out within the research in the Soviet Union, because we did not like to talk about religion, right? We didn't believe it was something that should be mentioned. But of course, if you think about the English language culture, texts dealing with religion formed a significant part of their communication. So consequently, the style existed, which is not included into our classifications. Right, and also the language continues to develop, and other functional styles continue to be added, or they can be added potentially. For example, excuse me. Я слушаю. Хорошо, я подойду. Спасибо большое. Sorry about that. Just communicating differently. Right, so talking about the changes or additions to the functional styles. One of the functional styles is the information technology style, because we do have text written on various topics dealing with information technology. Okay, and we can also talk about the so-called chat style, and we have actually a representation of the chat style accompanying this lecture, although we are quite official in that chat, and I've just been checked by security that I'm still here and not gone anywhere anyway, so they're keeping track of me, right? And of course, you're not using any smileys or emoticons or anything there, so we sound quite official in that chat. But of course, we have all sorts of graphic means which can be added to it if necessary, if you feel like it. Not that I request that you do it now, because we're coming to our end. Actually, our time is up. I would suggest several things. If you have any questions, do let me know on email, please. I am working on the papers which you sent me, but there's sheer volume of information I'm trying to come up with an option which will give me an opportunity to A, correct your papers, and B, provide you with the necessary information. So do be patient with me. And also, of course, it will be very nice if you also drop me a line on email confirming that you attended that lecture, because obviously I'm not going to have a roll call. You can see there are 32 people and 2 likes on this page. So I'm very pleased that there were some people who actually liked the lecture, right? I was told that the lecture will be available sometime after, but I'm not sure for how long, right? But as I said, again, you can try and listen to it once again. More likes are coming in. Thank you very much. I wasn't asking for them. Come on, right? Anyway, so it's getting rather late. Thank you very much for being here, right? Do advise me if you have any questions. I said you can follow. I was told that you can follow the link later. It should be saved on I guess on Google, on YouTube. Sorry, it should be saved on YouTube for at least some time. So the link is the same as in the mail. That's what I was told. I haven't tried it yet, but I will see, because I did a number of lectures earlier and even last week, and I will see if that is still alive from last week. Okay, but at the moment I have to say goodbye to you all, right? I have to let you go, and obviously I do have to go home as well, right? So I will advise you what will happen later, okay? Obviously, so keep an eye on the emails, right? Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.